They thought they had the power. They sent fines, threats, and warnings. But what they didn't know, I owned the one road every single one of them needed, and I was done playing nice. He had only lived in the neighborhood for 6 weeks when the first letter arrived. A quiet man, soft-spoken, and sharply observant. He'd chosen this high-end suburb for its quiet streets and well-manicured lawns, never imagining that beneath its perfect surface hid a petty, obsessive force known as the Homeowners Association. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, almost ceremonial in its presentation. He opened it slowly, half smiling, assuming it was a welcome letter. But instead, it scolded him for a non-standard mailbox. Mailbox is black with brass trim, it read. Community standard is matte white with aluminum handle. Non-compliance. Fine. $250. He blinked at the page. Was this serious? He laughed it off. Who cared? Who cared? Surely no. One would enforce that. He tossed the letter on his kitchen counter and didn't think much of it. A week later, another letter came. This one pointed out that his lawn exceeded the HOA's regulated height by 1.5 inches. Another $100 fine. Then came another, citing that the shade of gray he'd chosen for his garage door wasn't on the approved color palette. And the cherry on top? His car-on older model? SUV was described as visually incompatible with the community's visual standard. It wasn't just bureaucracy. It was harassment, layered in legalese, and hidden behind friendly fonts. Still, he didn't want to stir trouble. He ignored the notices, assuming they'd move on. But the letters kept coming thicker, more formal, more aggressive. And then, one afternoon, a package arrived by certified mail. Inside, a fine summary totaling $50,000. $50,000. The breakdown listed over a dozen infractions, some ridiculous.
Ow.
Like failure to trim ornamental shrubbery, and others outright fabricated. Like construction of unauthorized structure for a small shed, the previous owner had already had approved years ago. He read it twice, trying to stay calm. $50,000 for not having a white mailbox? For growing grass? For driving a car they didn't like? He stood in his living room, holding the papers, watching the neighborhood through his window. Everything looked normal, families pushing strollers, sprinklers hissing over flower beds, children riding scooters. But there was something new. Neighbors glancing at his home, whispering. One woman tugged her child away as they walked past his driveway. The next day, he received an email from the HOA board. It stated that due to his continued disregard for community regulations, he was now banned from attending neighborhood events, cookouts, holiday parties, even access to shared facilities like the pool and gym. He wasn't just being fined, he was being erased. His phone calls to the board went unanswered. Voicemails were ignored. And when he tried to speak to the board president in person, an elderly woman with a clipped tone and an artificial smile, she simply said, "Sir, if you can't respect the rules, you don't belong here." That evening, as he walked his dog through the neighborhood, 3 kids on bikes rode past him and one of them shouted, "That's the guy Mom said to stay away from." The others laughed and sped off. It wasn't just the HOA anymore. Poison was spreading. He returned. Holmes sat at his kitchen table and stared at the $50,000 fine letter one more time. His fingers drummed on the table. He could feel that familiar tightness behind the ribs, that rising heat in the chest. But he didn't lash out. He didn't write an angry email. He didn't post online. Instead, he opened his drawer, pulled out a manila folder, and flipped it open. Inside was the original land deed from the property purchase deal he had closed quietly, months before ever moving in. He stared at it, then pulled out his laptop and began searching. The next 2 hours were spent in silence, illuminated only by the screen's glow. He scanned county records, public maps, zoning archives. He followed the paper trail. And then he found it, a forgotten transaction, a minor deal. Piece of property sold off before the development was ever completed. Tiny on the map, barely registered on tax records. But absolutely essential. It was the only road leading in and out of the entire neighborhood, and he owned it. He sat back slowly, heart pounding, but not from anger. From realization, the HOA thought they had all the power. Fines, rules, social pressure. They thought he was just another resident stuck behind their gates, but they had no idea. The road was his, and the game had just changed. It had started long before he moved in years ago. In fact, back when the suburban neighborhood was still just a plan on a drawing board. The original developer had run out of money midway through the project. Loans defaulted, partners vanished, and construction stopped cold. During the liquidation, several small parcels of land were sold off quickly and quietly to recover what little they could. Most buyers had no idea what they were getting: scraps of lots, utility corners, odd-shaped easements. But he had been watching, not by accident. He had been looking for something exactly like that. One of those scraps was a narrow, curved stretch of blacktop leading off the county highway, a private road planned to connect the development to the outside world. Because the developer hadn't filed the easement transfer before going bankrupt, the road wasn't part of the HOA's holdings. It was technically still privately owned by whoever held that deed. He bought it for just under $400. No one noticed. No one cared. Not the bank. Not the county. Not even the developer's creditors. To them, it was just a road. But to him, it was a lever. A quiet, powerful lever. He had held on to that deed for years, like a chess piece waiting to be moved. And now, the moment had arrived. The same HOA that fined him for mailbox color and grass height had no idea that the asphalt beneath their BMWs and delivery vans wasn't theirs. The same board that threatened him with legal action every week didn't know that the road their entire neighborhood depended on belonged to the man they were trying to bully. He made no announcement. He didn't tell a soul. Instead, he drafted a short professional letter addressed to the HOA board, a formal notice of private property access fee for the continued use and wear of his private road, totaling $12,500 annually, included a copy of the property deed, GPS coordinates, and property map with county verification. No emotion, no threats, just paperwork. The board ignored it. A second notice followed, this time stamped and notarized. It gave the HOA 30 days to respond and settle the fee, or risk restricted access under his legal rights as sole property owner. Again, silence. Finally, an email came in response, not from a lawyer, but from the HOA secretary, filled with smug condescension. "We appreciate your enthusiasm," it read, "but it is highly unlikely that one individual owns the only access road to our community. We consider this matter closed." We didn't reply. He simply prepared the next step. A new sign was printed, professionally mounted on a steel post. It read, "Private road access by permit only." Another was smaller and attached just below, "Non-permitted vehicles subject to fines, duting, or tow." He sent one final notice to the HOA, this time warning that enforcement would begin within 10 days if the access fee remained unpaid. Their response? Fresh fine, this one for threatening the security of the community. The irony didn't even make him flinch. He spent the next few days setting things up. He contracted a private security firm to install a mechanical gate at the road's mouth, one that could rise and lower with remote access. It wasn't flashy, didn't need to be, just needed to work. Meanwhile, he quietly collected video. Footage of the road vehicles coming and going, the HOA's maintenance trucks, landscapers, food delivery drivers, residents, all of them using his property without permission, without paying a cent. He kept everything legal. He filed his road ownership with the county again, just to update it in the system. He filed a usage tax notice with the HOA. He gave them one. Last deadline: pay the access fee or lose it. The deadline came, the deadline went, and so did his patience. They still thought he was bluffing, still thought he was just another cranky homeowner, playing pretend. They had no idea what was coming. Mistake wasn't just that they ignored the notices. The real mistake, the one they'd come to regret, was assuming that the road they drove on every day had always belonged to them, but it didn't. It never had. And now, the man they tried to silence was about to become the only person who could grant them access to the outside world. They woke to the sound of confusion. Horns honking, voices raised, engines idling in frustration. At the single road leading into the pristine neighborhood lined with identical houses, flower beds, and proud American flags, a black metal gate now stood firmly across the asphalt, locked, guarded, and towering beside it. A newly installed sign in bold white letters on red, "Private property, nitrogen monoxide, public access without permit." Panic was instant. Early risers in business suits paced beside their Teslas, glancing at watches and murmuring into phones. Landscapers were parked in long rows with trailers and gear trapped behind the blockade. Even the local school bus, orange and wide-eyed, was stuck just beyond the turnoff, blinking helplessly. No one could get in. No one could get out. The gate didn't budge. The HOA's group chat exploded. What is this? Who installed a gate? This has to be illegal. Within minutes, the HOA president, a sharp-faced woman with a habit of interrupting, arrived at the scene. Robe barely tied phone to her ear, she demanded answers. But the security personnel at the gate didn't respond to her title. They responded to the name on the paperwork, and that name was his. He was already there. Standing a short distance away, calm and collected, a folder in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. He wasn't gloating, didn't raise his voice. He simply handed out laminated access permits only to a small number of residents, most of whom had stayed neutral in the HOA's feud or had privately apologized to him in recent weeks. Those who had led the charge against him. The ones who sent fines, wrote threats, called him a problem. They received nothing. The president stormed toward him, finger pointed, voice raised. "You can't do this. You're obstructing public access. This is illegal." He didn't respond. Right away. He simply handed her a thick manila envelope, copies of the road's deed, the county registration, a history of notices sent, and confirmation from the sheriff's office that the road had never been designated public or handed over to the HOA. Everything was notarized. Everything was legal. "You're trespassing," he said flatly. "As of this morning, only permitted vehicles may enter or exit. You've had every opportunity to resolve this." She sputtered, turned to the growing crowd behind her. "Call the police. Everyone. Call the county. This is criminal." But the police were already on the way. 2 cruisers rolled up from the far side of the road, lights off, but presence heavy. Officers stepped out, calm but curious. The man greeted them politely, offered the same folder. They read through it, flipping pages slowly. The HOA president insisted she was being harassed, held hostage, targeted, but the officers weren't buying it. One of them, a younger man with mirrored sunglasses, simply asked, "Is this your road, ma'am?" She hesitated. The man answered for her, "It's not. Never was." Check with zoning. They did. Within 20 minutes, the officers came. Back not with handcuffs, but with confirmation. The road was indeed private. The man had full legal authority to restrict access, enforce permit rules, require payment for public usage. The HOA president was stunned silent. The crowd of neighbors had gone from angry to unsure, now shifting toward whispers and lowered voices. A few began making phone calls of their own, not to lawyers, but to moving companies. It didn't take long for the media to find the story. By that afternoon, local news van was parked across the highway, a reporter standing beneath the gate. With wind blowing her hair into the microphone, the headline was pure gold. HOA tries to fine homeowner $50,000, learns he owns their only road. It was the kind of story that made national rounds within hours. Videos popped up online. A drone shot of the gate appeared on a neighborhood Facebook page. Comments flooded in. "He's a legend. That's justice." The quiet ones. Lawsuits followed, of course. The HOA board scrambled to file an emergency injunction, accusing him of extortion, endangerment, and obstruction. But the court filings were weak. The judge, after reviewing the documentation, refused to even grant a temporary order. He reminded the HOA that they'd had multiple warnings and had failed to respond. In legal terms, their negligence was astonishing. In practical terms, they had just lost control of their community's only access point. Behind the scenes, the HOA was falling apart. Several board members resigned within days. Residents began questioning everything. Why had the HOA gone after him so aggressively? Why had no one realized the road wasn't theirs? Why had they found someone who held that much power? Meanwhile, the man didn't celebrate. He didn't hold press conferences or gloat online. Simply kept handing out permits quietly, respectfully only to those who hadn't tried to bury him under red tape and arrogance. He remained exactly what he had always been, a calm, private individual who had no intention of being pushed around. But now everyone knew, and the HOA. They were scrambling to save face in a neighborhood where the road itself answered to someone. Else it didn't happen with fireworks or speeches. No grand showdown. No tearful announcements. It's just a quiet email, sent at midnight to every resident in the neighborhood. It came from the HOA board's official address and contained a single-page and official withdrawal of the $50,000 fine, a formal apology to the homeowner, and the immediate resignation of the entire board, effective immediately. No explanations. No justifications. Just surrender. The neighborhood woke up to more silence than usual. A patrol car slowly circling the blocks. No clipboard-wielding volunteers inspecting lawns or checking for violations. Just the faint hum of lawnmowers and the rustle of wind through trees. For the first time in a long time, people stepped outside and looked around not with suspicion, but with relief. The man received a knock on his door that morning, but it wasn't from the HOA. It was from his neighbors. A small group, some who had stayed quiet. Others who had once followed the board's orders without question, now stood in front of him, awkward and humble. One of them, a man with tired eyes and a stiff voice, spoke first. "We didn't know. What they did to you wasn't right." Another chimed in. "You handled it better than most would have. I think a lot of us owe you more than an apology." He didn't say much in response, just nodded, thanked them, and invited them in for coffee. It wasn't a victory parade. It was something quieter, more meaningful. Understanding. Respect. Over. The next few days, the community began to meet informally, no longer under the HOA's command, but as a group of residents trying to figure out what came next. The man attended, not as a leader, not demanding anything, just as a neighbor with a very firm hand on the only road leading into their lives. They asked what he wanted, whether he planned to charge every car that drove over his property, whether he would shut them out completely. But he didn't threaten, didn't gloat. He offered them two options: dissolve the HOA and move forward as a neighborhood built on mutual respect, or keep it and begin paying annual access fees along with legal upkeep, maintenance permits, and liability coverage for every tire that touched his road. It didn't take long. Within the week, a neighborhood-wide vote was held in the community center. It was the largest turnout they'd ever had. Residents filed in with ballots in hand, some with babies on their hips, others still in work boots and scrubs. And when the votes were counted, the result was undeniable. A landslide decision to dissolve the HOA completely. No more arbitrary fines. No more uniform mailbox colors. No more board meetings about hedge height or curtain visibility from the street. It's just people living their lives side by side, like they used to before rules turned into weapons. The transformation was immediate. Neighbors started helping each other again. Kids played freely without being told to move off sidewalks. People painted their homes the colors they liked, and no one complained. Gardens grew wild and beautiful. The man watched it all quietly from his porch, sipping his coffee each morning, letting the world go by without judgment. At the road's entrance, the gate remained, but it was always open now, unlocked, unless needed. A single new sign hung. Beside it, simple, not threatening, but clear: respect others, or take the long way home. He didn't need to enforce anything anymore. People understood, they remembered. Not just who he was, but what he represented. Calm in the face of pressure, principle over pride, and power used only when pushed too far. He never once mentioned the $50,000 again. Never billed anyone for damages. Never closed the gate, unless absolutely necessary. The road remained his. It's not out of spite, but as a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest piece of ground holds the greatest leverage, and sometimes the quietest person in the neighborhood is the one holding everything together. And so, The days rolled on. The neighborhood found its rhythm again. Laughter returned. So did trust. There were no more fines, no more warnings. Only fences that kept dogs in, not people out. Each morning the man sat on his porch with the same thermos of coffee, his dog, lying lazily at his feet, and watched as cars rolled smoothly past his gate. Some drivers waved. Others honked lightly in thanks. Most just nodded as they drove by, because they knew. And that was enough. Peace wasn't handed to the neighborhood. It was earned, one quiet step at a time.